Welcome to eBuilder University's on-demand video training. If you would like to learn more about additional training opportunities, please contact your account manager. Now let's jump into Intro to Cashflow.
Good day, everyone. My name is Martin Estezarian, certified eBuilder trainer, and today we're going to be speaking about the cash flow tool within the cost module of eBuilder. So cash flow is a very important aspect of managing a project. It's going to allow you to manage and understand how much future funds you're going to require at any given point of the project. Now, the cash flow module has a couple of prerequisites in order for it to work in the most effective way possible. One of those prerequisites is that it's more ideal to use the cash flow module when you have already established a project schedule. Again, is going to be done in our schedule module. There are going to be some components within the schedule module that we're going to see in today's demonstration of the module, but I just want to keep it in mind that it would be more beneficial for you to have a schedule drawn out on the schedule module prior to you setting up your cash flow in eBuilder. So as you can see on the screen, I have a cost summary of a sample project that I've created for the purpose of this training. And this is where we're going to begin navigating towards the cash flow module. So once I'm in the cost summary, I am currently in the cost module within a project. And if I scroll down the project menu, I'm going to see right here in the cost menu, the tool called cash flow. So let's go ahead and click that. Now, once in the cash flow module, you're going to see a screen like this. There's not really a lot to look at because the cash flow for this specific project has not been set up. So my intention is to walk you through that process and make sure you understand how to completely set up your cash flow so that you can also use it for other modules such as reporting and capital planning if that's a module that you've purchased in eBuilder. So let's proceed. The first thing I want to do is I want to set up my cash flow. So I'm going to click this button here that's conveniently called Set Up Cash Flow. Now, I've created a very small project budget for this project. So let's look at the real estate on the page to make sure you guys are okay with what you're seeing. So the first thing you're going to see on the screen is all the budget line items of your project. I've created very simple budget line items for my project, but you're going to see them listed here on the left-hand side. And the idea here is that we are going to calculate the cash flow or the required amount of money on hand we're going to need at a certain point in time within the project for each one of these activities in the work breakdown structure. So I want to make sure you guys are good on what you're seeing here. These are, again, budget line items. So the first setting that we're going to determine here is what we call the cash flow curve. And as you can see, we have a couple of samples here that probably will take you back to 8th grade geometry class or even high school geometry class, where you're going to see all the typical curves that most people know. The most popular ones are the bell curve and the S curve, but we also have linear models here. We have inverse bells and inverse S curves. Now, when I show this typically in a training class, I like to draw out a bell curve on the board and kind of describe what it means. So I'm going to do that really quickly on another software here. I'm going to open up a really good piece of software called Paint. I'm sure all of us have used it. Okay. And I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by a bell curve. Most people have seen a bell curve. Some people may have forgotten what it is. I'm going to remind you on what it is. So a bell curve kind of looks like this. All right? Now, what does this represent in the construction world? Well, I'm going to draw the two axes, not really straight lines here, across the bell curve. We have our vertical axis and our horizontal axis. And really what we're doing here is we are going to measure time, which is this axis right here, against money, which is this axis right here. And so in reality, the story the bell curve is going to give us is it's going to give us how much money we're going to need at a given period of time, okay? Now, the type of curve that you select has to be conducive with the activity that you're selecting it for. And what I mean by activities is I mean the work breakdown structure activities that you see here. So a very typical activity that mimics a bell curve type pattern for spending would be the general construction. In other words, construction in general always kind of takes on a very bell curve pattern when it comes to spending or needing the money for a certain period of time. In other words, it starts off very low, it peaks out, and then it comes right back down over time. the complete opposite of that would be something like architectural services, which would be probably an inverse S-curve, which means that the money would be needed at a higher level at the very beginning, and then over time it'll dwindle down into a very low number. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the curves according to those items. So what I'm going to do is for consultants, I'm going to make that linear, because consultants are something that most likely we're going to take on the entire project. Architectural services, we'll probably do inverse S-curve. General construction, I'm going to do bell curve. And then for closeout services, I'm actually going to do an S-curve. Because if I go back to my paint here, an S-curve would look something like this, where it starts off super low and then it actually increases over a period of time. And as you can see, all these curves, my linear, my bell curve, my S-curve, my inverse S-curve, will eventually all cross paths. But the cool thing about the cash flow tool is that even though this occurs, it will accurately calculate how much money I need at a given time based on the curves that I've selected here. Now comes the second part of setting up your cash flow, and this is what I call the time factor, okay? Now, the time factor is going to give you three options. Now, at the beginning of the video, I mentioned something, and I'm going to mention it again. It is more ideal to set up your cash flow when you have already set up a schedule in the project. However, it's not a necessity. In other words, there is a choice here that you could use within this specific setting that in the absence of a schedule will still produce a cash flow. And I'm going to go through those choices with you. So let's talk about the most basic choice. The most basic choice is this choice here called link to project. Now remember, the curves that I drew in the diagram earlier, the horizontal line at the bottom represented time. So in essence, what we're doing is we're determining how much money we're going to need in a given period of time across that graph, okay? So what you're determining here is the time that you're going to associate to each budget line item. So the best example I can give you, and this is something you should write down as you watch this video, and I'll give you a very raw and easy example. Let's just hypothetically say a project is going to last a year, January 1st to December 31st. Now, it's safe to say that construction, physical construction, is not going to happen from the very beginning. The answer is yes. In other words, you're going to have design activities. You're going to have pre-construction activities. Construction is going to happen within that time frame. Now, if you were to choose link to project for anything, in essence, what you're saying is that this specific time frame for this specific budget line item will take on the length of the entire project. However, the reason that this is something you can use in the absence of a schedule is because this specific choice is linked to something that you may have seen before. And I'm going to open it for you. That choice is actually linked to two fields that you find in your project details page, which is the start date and the target date. Now, I've created a schedule already that actually updated these fields for us, but by default, these fields are blank. Or these fields are very rough order of magnitude dates that you can choose from the very beginning that would give you some sort of a rough idea as to the start date of the project and the target date of the project. So in essence, if I chose link to project in this specific line item, I am in essence linking it to these two values right now because I am linking it to project. Okay, that's what that choice allows you to do. Now, the second option I want to show you is link to schedule. Now, because there is a setting in the schedule module for eBuilder that basically states that if you baseline a schedule, if you set up your schedule module, there is a setting that we have in place that says once that schedule has been confirmed, the dates in the project details page will take on that exact time frame. So the argument here is very easy. In other words, if I pick link to project or link to schedule, it's literally the same time frame. And the reason that these two are options is because sometimes folks do not link the schedule to the project. They just simply have the project as the rough order of magnitude date range, and then the schedule will be the exact date range, and they keep both of those different because they want to know how close they were, right, in order to compare. But in this case, I have those two connected. So the two date ranges are going to be the same. And in reality, me choosing link to schedule in this case or link to project is really going to yield me the same values. Okay? So in essence, if I choose link to schedule, I am saying that I am going to measure cash flow from a linear perspective from the beginning of the project all the way to the end of the project, which I think is very conducive of something like consultants, because that's typically going to follow me along the entire project. Now, the third option I find to be the most interesting, which is link to tasks. This is where having a schedule is really, really important. Because if you have a schedule, you can link this directly to the tasks within a schedule. Meaning, the schedule is going to have activities that exemplify each item. So if I click this drop-down menu, what you are seeing here are line items within my project schedule. Let me demonstrate that to you. I'm going to open up my project schedule on another tab, and you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. So this is my project schedule. Okay. And these are the activities in my project schedule. You will notice that all of these activities are going to be presented in the choices that I just showed you. So kind of take a mental picture of this: acquisition, planning, design, construction, occupancy. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right back to the page that I'm on, and I'm going to click this drop-down menu. Overall, acquisition, planning, design, construction, and occupancy. Okay? So obviously overall was the roll-up in my schedule, the one that I just showed, and these were all the sub-activities. But each one of these activities has its own date range. So for architectural services, I'm going to put that in design. Now, the reason that the module offers you two drop-down menus here is because it gives you the ability of creating a range. So let's hypothetically say I wanted to make the time frame between the design activity and the end of the construction activities. I can create a range between these two for time. So anything that I've placed in the curve will be determined based on this time frame. But for this, I'm just simply going to select design because that's more conducive to architectural services. Now for this one, it's going to be a layup because I'm going to click link to task, and I'm just going to grab construction. And this last one, I'm going to probably link to task and choose occupancy. Now again, what I am choosing here does not have to be what you choose for your individual cash flows. This is just me giving you an example. Obviously, there's going to be some thought placed in this, and you're going to understand what part of your schedule is going to coincide best with the items in your work breakdown structure. So that takes a little bit of time to understand, but that's more from a company-to-company perspective, okay? Now, the last item that you're setting up for your cash flow is what we label as payment lag. So payment lag, my understanding in a very simple, easy to understand example is it's the time frame of getting an invoice approved to the point where it's physically paid. So this is where you start thinking about how you're running your business. Are you going to do net 30 agreements, net 45, net 60? It all depends on how you guys have the contracts set up with your individual vendors. So as an owner, you're going to have to determine that. Now, you don't necessarily have to have the same payment lag all the way down the road. I'm going to do it based on this example, but you can actually select payment lags, different ones for each one of the activities, if that is the case. But as you can see, I just simply placed 30 days here. I clicked apply to all, and it applied the 30 days across all the activities in my cash flow. So very simply, that's one way that you can go about setting up your cash flow. Now, another way, which I'm going to create another video for to show you how to physically do that, it's very easy, is you can use a template. Now, what is the template going to do? It's obviously going to take all these things that we just did manually, and it's going to do it automatically. So there is a way to get that done in the cash flow tool. It just takes some setup in order to do that, and I'm going to show you that in a separate video, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save my work. And when I typically show people this screen after setting up the cash flow, they start asking questions. Did I really do anything? There's really nothing different on the page that there was before. You really did save your setup. It just doesn't show it on this page in eBuilder. Let's start taking the next steps in order to really confirm if we set up our cash flow. So again, the first button that we clicked was set up cash flow. The second button that you're going to click is going to be update cash flow. Let's click that. Now this screen is going to be very, very busy. It's going to show you a couple of things, but I want to direct your attention to the table below. Once again, what we have in front of us are work breakdown structure, all the budget line items that we calculated cash flow for. We also have what's called the projected budget. For anybody that has already done the cost videos, the projected budget is going to include both your current budget amounts plus any pending or projected changes to the budget. Okay, so right now that's going to be pretty much this number. Actuals to date is going to show you how many actuals you have actually approved, how many invoices you've approved. As you can see in this project, we are fairly new in this project, so literally no invoices have been approved. We are preliminarily planning our cash flow. And the most important column here is going to be this one that says remaining to be allocated. Now, the reason it says this is because what you're in essence about to do is you're going to spread this money across the time frames in the curve pattern that you've selected in the setup menu across this entire time frame. And as you can see, when I scroll to the right, you're going to see all the months and, of course, the years that this project is going to expand into. Okay, so it's going to show you that month by month. It's going to help you calculate the cash flow. Okay, and if let's say you are doing this prior, you're doing this cash flow after you've already done the project. Let's say you have projects in eBuilder and you've already done some cost transactions. It doesn't mean you can't set up your cash flow. You can always set up your cash flow. But the point that I'm trying to make here is that if that's the case, you can click this button right here and it would show what's called previous months. So if you don't click this, it will always show you from the month that we're in forward. But in the event that, let's say, you have a project that's already in motion, you already have transactions, you already have some sort of cost activity, and you want to see the months prior after you've set up your cash flow, you can do that here as well. Also here, it says must allocate all funds in projections. If you unclick this, eBuilder will not force you in this exercise to move all this money from this column across all your months. However, I typically click this as a best practice because I always like to account all my money across all the individual months. There are different business reasons why some people might choose differently there, but that's a personal preference of mine. Now, what you can do is you can select individual lines here like this, and you can recalculate the selected, meaning recalculate the selected is spreading the money across. That's really what these buttons are doing, the recalculate buttons. They are calculating your money across the time frames that you've dictated for each one of them. But I typically do not bother with these checkboxes because when I set up my cash flow, I set it up in its entirety. So I like choosing this whole recalculate all button over here. So when I click it, watch what happens. All the money leaves the remaining to be allocated column and it moves into the different months of the year. Now you will notice that there's a lot of zeros on the bottom line here because it's actually calculating how much money I'm going to need in the year and when I'm going to need it by. Now obviously these calculations are very rough because I have a very small budget. In other words, I don't have a lot of budget line items or a large work breakdown structure. So it's going to kind of look weird because the distribution is not as granular as it probably would be in a real project. But what you are seeing here is how the money is displayed based on time frame, based on the curve, based on everything that we've set up. Okay? So I just want to make sure you guys are good with that. Now, once we are done with this screen, I'm going to scroll to the top and I'm going to click Save. Now, the home screen that we were on before is going to look a little different. Now we're actually going to see some activity here. We're actually going to see the cash flow that we just calculated. Okay, and once again, it will allow you to see all previous months in the cash flow as well. So in essence, it is going to show you what you've just calculated in the Update Cash Flow section. Now, the third step, I think, is the most important step. I want all the people using capital planning to make a note of what I'm about to say. The step that we are about to take is baselining the cash flow, meaning we are going to draw a line in the sand. Cash flow inevitably is going to change. Projections are going to change. Everything is based on time and money. We are projecting what's going to happen with time and money. And anytime you project those things, there's always something that's not going to go as planned. So the next step that we're going to take is we're going to set a baseline. We're basically going to say this is what we thought the cash flow was going to be. We're going to draw the line in the sand. That way, when things change in the future, we will always be able to see where we were with our baseline for comparison purposes. Now, eBuilder doesn't give you a big baseline button on this screen. You have to take one step before you get there. And the first step you need to take is you need to click this link right here called Current Cash Flow. When you click it, the screen's going to slightly change, but lo and behold, you have a Save Baseline button here on the upper right. And this will enable you to draw that line in the sand that I just finished talking about. So I'm going to click the Save Baseline button. And you'll notice down here, it's going to say, have you baselined? And when you say yes here, that means you've completed the task. Now, to go back to where you were before, it's a little bit unintuitive, but it works. It's very quick. You're going to click Cancel. And watch what happens to the screen that we were on before. You get a physical diagram of what your cash flow looks like. Now, one thing I want to make mention of is that this diagram right here does not represent individual cash flows for individual work breakdown structure items. This cash flow represents the entire project. And as I said, because I have a very rough testing type model here, the cash flow is not going to be as smooth as it probably would be in a real project with a very large comprehensive schedule and a good amount of budget line items. It's a pretty cut and dry cash flow. But the cool thing about this is that if you click into this diagram right here, it's going to give you what I like to label as waypoints that look like this. And what these waypoints are going to do, if you focus here on the left-hand side, these waypoints are actually going to give you different areas and different points in the cash flow as to how much money you're going to need. So it seems like the peak, when we take into consideration every aspect of our project, the peak of our cash flow is going to be around June 2019, and then it's going to kind of dwindle down, okay? But the benefit of this is actually going to give you a visual perspective as to how your cash flow is going to behave throughout the course of your project. Another thing I want you to notice is that we have baseline here and we have current here. Obviously, everything is the same now. We've just finished baselining the schedule. So the reason these two exist is because as time goes by, as transactions are processed, these numbers are going to change. And what eBuilder is going to do here eventually is it's going to ask you a question. Do you want to adopt the projection of your cash flow based on current numbers, or do you want to hold on to it as your baseline numbers? Now, the reason it presents it this way is because sometimes your project could go slightly off track a little bit, but you can pick up the pace and maybe catch up, and the baseline numbers are going to hold true. But if, let's say, the current numbers reflect a more accurate projection as to where your cash flow is going, you're going to want to adopt your current so you can get the most accurate cash flow projections. So I'm going to go ahead and close this diagram, and there's one more thing I want to show you as far as the cash flow is concerned. I'm going to go right back into the Update Cash Flow screen. This is the screen that we saw before, okay? And I'm going to show you this little icon right here. This little icon is actually the graph for the individual item. Okay, in this case, it's general construction. So if I click on this little icon right here, this graph is showing me general construction only. And as you notice, general construction, because it is the beefiest part of my budget, is going to show me my peak at my project. So there are going to be other things involved in that aspect, but this is actually going to show me my peak. Now, one thing that we've added, I would probably say about 3 years ago to eBuilder today, is this one right here called Define the Curve. So when you click Define the Curve, what it lets you physically do is it lets you move the curve around and define it on your own. You can create a curve like a custom curve, okay? Now, there's not much for me to work with here, but if, let's say, you want to create the famous double camel hump, right? Where, in essence, it's not just one bell curve, but it's multiple bell curves within one item, this will give you the ability to do it, okay? So I just want to point that out in the event that we have some very advanced cash flow people watching the video. This will give you the option to do it, okay? So I'm going to go back to where I was before, and I'm going to click Save. All right. So in essence, when you go back to cancel here and you go back to the home page, you now have a setup cash flow, you now have a cash flow diagram, and most importantly, you have a baseline cash flow. And the cool thing about this is that this is going to talk to your entire cost module. So as you process change orders, budget changes, actuals, all the transactions that happen within the cost module, the cash flow module will actually grab that data and help you adjust your projections accordingly. Thank you for watching. I hope this was helpful, and stay tuned for the next cash flow video.
If you would like to learn more about additional training opportunities, please contact your account manager.